They noticed the anomaly during what should have been a quiet calibration cycle, a night where the James Webb team expected nothing more than routine telemetry from 3I/ATLAS. The object had already drawn attention across the scientific community, but no one imagined the alert that flashed across the console. A spectral pattern so unmistakably organic that it felt like a message. Every researcher in the room turned to the main monitor, staring in disbelief at the confirmation line that should have been impossible. A faint oxygen-methane disequilibrium, complex carbon absorption bands, and something that looked eerily like metabolic cycling rhythm. For the first time since the object entered the solar system, the question was no longer whether 3I/ATLAS was unusual. The question became whether it was alive. The shock deepened because this wasn't the first interstellar object humanity had tracked. Oumuamua had passed silently, leaving only speculation in its wake. Borisov had behaved more like a normal comet. But Atlas defied expectations from the moment it was detected, too consistent in its rotation, too warm for deep space, too active in non-sublimating regions, and now carrying the one signal no one could argue with. Organic chemistry with intent, not random, not noise. Something maintained the balance inside the object, something that didn't occur without either biology or advanced engineering behind it. The team replayed the raw spectra, searching for errors, artifacts, anything that could protect them from making the most astonishing announcement in human history. But the data only sharpened with every cross-analysis. Peaks aligned perfectly with molecules associated with extremophile survival, compounds that could shield life from vacuum, cosmic rays, and frozen epochs between stars. The Webb team felt the ground shift beneath them because these signatures weren't accidental. They pulsed, they repeated, they cycled like breathing. The first whispers behind closed doors began. Could 3IATLAS be carrying dormant organisms? Could it be a biological capsule, a drifting chamber seeded with life? The idea sounded outrageous, yet the data demanded that possibility. And the reality became harder to dismiss when a second anomaly emerged. Rhythmic plumes venting from the object's surface. Jets that fired in geometric sequences rather than chaotic bursts. Comets don't produce patterns. Nature doesn't arrange sublimation into countdown-like pulses. Something about Atlas responded to the sunlight with the precision of a machine and the sensitivity of a cell. The object's trajectory complicated matters. Predictions suggested a near pass, but Atlas corrected itself in subtle ways, drifting along a path that looked increasingly intentional. Analysts argued it was simply reacting to solar radiation pressure, but the changes were too smooth, too coordinated. Webb's infrared imaging captured heat spreading across the object like waking muscles. Temperatures rose where they should have stayed frozen. Materials flexed where rock should have fractured. Nothing about the visitor was behaving passively. New images from independent observatories added fuel to the growing storm. The surface of Atlas wasn't uniform. Beneath melted ice were structures. Hexagonal nodules, ridges etched in fractal symmetry, filamentous veins running along its crust. They resembled neither geology nor mechanical paneling. They resembled the hardened shell of an organism, or the ribbed plating of a vessel built to protect something sacred inside. When specialists enhanced the thermal map, they saw clusters of internal heat spots arranged like chambers. The possibility that these chambers held dormant material ignited panic meetings across global space agencies. Nothing leaked to the public yet, but the tone inside those rooms changed. Officials debated if the object contained extremophile spores, frozen colonies, engineered microlife, or something designed to survive beyond star systems. The discovery of polycyclic aromatic patterns, organic molecules with complexity impossible in inert ice, deepened concerns. The internal pulses became clearer as Webb focused harder. The repeating chemical waves matched cycles known from microbial metabolism. Not exactly identical, but close enough to terrify specialists. The rhythms weren't random. They were self-correcting, adjusting when solar radiation increased or when distant cosmic rays struck. Some structure inside Atlas reacted to its environment like a living organism shielding its precious cargo. Then came the most disturbing detection. Molecular chirality that matched Earth's. Left-handed amino acids dominated the signals. That should not have happened unless life, actual life, was thriving or preserved inside. The implications were catastrophic and beautiful. Either Earth wasn't unique, or something ancient seeded worlds across the galaxy with the same blueprint. A second data packet arrived from Webb at dawn. It revealed filaments under the cracked surface. Long, crystalline threads that aligned under magnetism. These filaments flexed, curled, and straightened. Some pulsed with faint luminescence. Scientists stared at the footage for hours. They weren't just organic, they were responsive. They behaved like the scaffolding of a dormant colony preparing to reawaken. And then the magnetic field readings spiked. Atlas started emitting oscillations completely unlike cometary magnetic signatures. Instead of chaotic bursts, the waves followed repeating geometric ratios consistent with encoded information, not language, but the pattern of a system that once communicated, or still did. Theories spread like wildfire. Was Atlas a biological ark? A seed vault drifting between stars? A living probe? A fragment of a much larger organism? Or debris from an ancient civilization that mixed biology and engineering so completely that the two were indistinguishable? No one knew. But the evidence kept expanding, and soon it became impossible for anyone involved to pretend they weren't witnessing something monumental. The outer shell fractured days later. Small pieces broke free, drifting around the object like shedding skin. Webb scanned them immediately. The fragments were hollow. Inside were cyst-like particles, microscopic but unmistakably structured. They resembled spores, encapsulated inside layers of mineral and organic composites, extremophiles trapped in crystalline cages. Nature had never produced anything like them on Earth. The news leaked. A fragment of an internal NASA memo spread online, sparking frenzied speculation. The memo mentioned life-positive parameters and active metabolic transitions. People demanded answers. Governments rushed statements denying any discovery of alien biology, but the wave could not be stopped. Humanity wanted the truth, and the truth was heading closer every hour. Atlas brightened suddenly, not from sunlight, but from within. The chambers glowed like lanterns beneath cracking ice. Infrared imaging showed heat blooming in patterns, spirals, branching arteries, sacs swelling and contracting like embryonic organs. Something inside was waking up, reacting, or preparing for a transition that had been dormant for millennia. Observatories across Earth confirmed it simultaneously. Atlas had accelerated. The change was small, but undeniable. Something inside the object released controlled jets. Not from random fissures, but aligned vents, each firing with surgical precision. Natural bodies don't navigate. They tumble, they drift, they obey gravity. Atlas was choosing its path. Scientists attempted simulations of the complex molecules detected inside the fragments. The reactions were astonishing. Under simulated solar energy, the molecules entered a stable metabolic loop, absorbing and releasing energy like tiny biological engines. They even responded to specific wavelengths, thriving under infrared, slowing under ultraviolet, dying in total darkness. These were not ordinary organics. They were designed to survive the void. The object's next behavior made global headlines. As it approached the inner system, its chemical plume changed. Webb captured the plume rippling against solar wind like a living membrane, resisting, molding, even using it for propulsion. Jets formed spirals. Patterns emerged again. Hexagons, spirals, nested fractals older than human civilization. When the object rotated, exposing a large damaged region, the truth became even harder to hide. Beneath the shattered crust, chambers pulsed with bioluminescence. Delicate membranes stretched across them, quivering with each thermal shift. Something inside breathed, slowly, deeply, as if sensing the star it had long awaited. The chambers swelled until thin cracks formed, releasing tiny clouds of dust. But when the instruments analyzed those drifting specks, they discovered they were not dust at all. They were spores, tiny capsules hardened against radiation. They drifted with surprising coherence, resisting dispersal. It looked intentional, as though Atlas was scattering seeds. The implications horrified governments. If those spores survived atmospheric entry, what would they do on Earth? Would they die harmlessly, awaken, assimilate, adapt? No one could answer. A global emergency meeting convened. Arguments erupted over whether to intercept the object, observe it, or attempt communication. Some nations demanded destruction. Others insisted humanity had no right to interfere with something older than their entire species. The object's internal temperature surged again. The membranes inside flexed like muscular tissue under strain. For a moment, Atlas stabilized its rotation completely. Something no natural object had ever done. It hung in space, perfectly aligned with Earth and the Sun, as if studying both. A signal burst followed. Radio telescopes caught it across 4 continents. The pattern was faint but undeniable. Not message, not random noise. A map. A molecular map aligned with ancient cosmic charts humanity once carved into stone. patterns that appeared in Sumerian tablets, patterns mysteriously echoed in the Gilgamesh tomb narrative, and the strange Anunnaki diagrams carved into forgotten temple walls. Coincidence, perhaps, or a reminder that humanity had seen pieces of this before without understanding them. The fracture expanded. Atlas was shedding mass rapidly, revealing an intricate network inside. Webb's final unobstructed images showed a honeycomb of biological chambers, some cracked, some glowing, some collapsed. In the center, a vast sphere floated, filled with trillions of microscopic organisms suspended in a gelatinous matrix, a biological archive, a vault older than the planets in our sky. The sphere pulsed once, and again, slowly, steadily, as if sensing proximity to warmth again after an eternity frozen in space. Analysts calculated the trajectory. When Atlas fragmented completely, part of its debris field would intersect Earth's orbital path, not directly impacting the planet, but close enough for microscopic particles to spread. Too small to track, too numerous to intercept, too resilient to guarantee containment. Scientists argued until their voices cracked. Was this arrival a threat, a catastrophe, a cosmic accident? Or was it a gift, an ancient message that life in the universe spreads itself deliberately, drifting from star to star on vessels like Atlas? The final moment came abruptly. Atlas brightened one last time, flaring from within as if igniting its final reserves. The chambers burst open, light flashed through the cracks. The inner sphere expanded, shattering the crust outward into a cloud of glittering shards. A shock wave of microscopic life rippled out into space, carried by solar wind toward the inner system. The James Webb team watched silently. No one spoke. No one breathed. Something ancient had woken and released itself across the void, and humanity could only witness. Atlas was not a comet, not an asteroid, not a random visitor. It had been a traveler, a carrier, a messenger, and something inside it had chosen this moment to awaken. The shockwave dispersed slower than expected, as though the particles resisted scattering too widely. Telescopes captured streaming filaments of dust curving gently toward the sun, but embedded within that dust were denser motes, tiny clusters that held shape even under solar wind shear. Analysts enlarged the data and noticed individual spores rotating, aligning, subtly adjusting their positions relative to the magnetic field lines threading through space. They behaved with something like intention, or at least reflexes that didn't belong to inert material. Even at microscopic scale, the debris of Atlas refused to behave like debris. Hours later, the wave reached the heliospheric boundary sensors. Devices meant to measure solar particles suddenly lit with anomalies, repeating fluctuations, rhythmic pulses that matched the metabolic cycles Webb had picked up earlier inside Atlas. The sensors vibrated with patterns like heartbeat signatures, except no heartbeat had ever traveled through the vacuum of space. The notion that these spores might be communicating with each other across distances terrified the research teams. Life shouldn't work like that. Biology shouldn't operate like a distributed network across millions of kilometers. Yet here it was, unfolding in real time. The first intercepted cluster drifted closer to Earth than predicted, skimming the outer limits of the magnetosphere. Spacecraft recorded faint flashes along the exosphere where the particles brushed charged atoms, illuminating themselves like tiny sparks. They glowed briefly, dimmed, glowed again. Some researchers worried it was a form of testing, a probing action like a blind organism feeling the edges of a new environment. Others wondered if the spores were simply reacting chemically to the energy around them. But underlying every interpretation was the same dread. The spores hadn't died in open space. They'd awakened. Ground-based radio telescopes began picking up faint oscillations, softer than the emissions from ATLAS, but unmistakably similar in pattern. They drifted through space like echoes of the object's last pulse. Some claimed they were decay signatures of the spore's internal chemistry. Others argued they were coordinated responses, small, localized bursts that resembled communal signaling. Regardless of explanation, it became impossible to deny that whatever Atlas carried had been designed to activate in a star system. Arrival had triggered awakening. Government agencies scrambled. Meetings lasted day and night. Plans for interception rotated through every major spacefaring nation. Proposals ranged from sterilizing the drifting clusters with directed energy beams to capturing samples in specialized containment pods. Extreme measures entered conversation as well: nuclear disintegration, magnetic isolation, even proposals to manipulate solar wind trajectories. None offered guarantees. The spores were too numerous, too small, too widely dispersed, and no military strategist wanted humanity to launch weapons towards something that might be biological and sentient. The brightest minds tried to decode the radio pulses echoing from the drifting clusters. They found ratios aligning with the same ancient patterns traced in pre-human artifacts across Mesopotamia, in geometric alignments hidden in Sumerian texts, in diagrams humanity once dismissed as proto-astronomy. The matches were loose enough to avoid wild conclusions, but tight enough to raise unsettling possibilities. Had ancient civilizations encountered something similar? Had fragments of interstellar life reached Earth before? Or were the patterns simply universal, emerging naturally from mathematics embedded in the universe's fabric? Atlas's core remnants, still tumbling deeper into the system, released another plume of light. Dimmer now, weaker, the last flash from a dying organism or a machine expiring after fulfilling its purpose. Webb caught the image. The central sphere collapsed inward, its gel-like matrix decompressing into a cloud of shimmering dust. And within that dust floated the last intact clusters, drifting like translucent seeds caught in a cosmic breeze. The poetic beauty of it only magnified the terror of the unknown. A cluster approached one of the monitors aboard the orbital platform Starlance 3, cameras focused on it, capturing unprecedented detail. The spore wasn't a simple capsule. It was multi-layered, crystalline with complex geometry at microscopic scale, transparent ridges intertwined like braided fibers. Inside was a darker core that seemed to ripple, expanding and contracting as if it sensed the camera's infrared beam. The crew stared in disbelief. This wasn't a passive life form. It reacted, it adapted, it learned. The crew cut off the scan, but it was too late. The spore released a faint luminescent pulse before drifting away. The same pulse reached ground-based detectors seconds later. Scientists compared the two signals and realized with a chill that the pulse was directional, sent toward Earth. The timing was precise enough to suggest it wasn't a reflex. It was recognition. Humanity entered a phase of collective silence, not officially, but emotionally. The world paused. News networks struggled to frame the situation without inciting panic. Schools broadcast simplified explanations. Religious institutions issued statements interpreting the event as proof of divine creation, cosmic trial, or forbidden signs. Social media erupted with theories, some absurd, some insightful, some terrifyingly plausible. Everyone sensed history shifting under their feet, and no one knew where it would settle. Meanwhile, more spores drifted toward Earth. Most burned harmlessly in the upper atmosphere, producing faint streaks of unnatural color visible at night, blue-green flickers that locals described as living meteors. But a few survived long enough to release small flashes before disintegrating, as though transmitting final data back to the clusters still in space. Scientists had no clue whether those pulses were distress signals, warnings, or seeds fulfilling natural life cycles. The spores that didn't head toward Earth moved inward, carried by solar wind toward Venus and Mercury. Some drifted outward toward Mars, Jupiter, and the asteroid belt. Humanity watched through telescopes as these microscopic travelers dispersed throughout the solar system, distributing themselves in a pattern that seemed strategic rather than random, like branching veins, like a nervous system extending its reach. The James Webb team continued tracking the densest cluster, the one that glimmered like a tiny constellation following the same orbital path Atlas once held. The spores in that cluster maintained formation. Positioning relative to one another shifted subtly, maintaining geometric coherence even under turbulence. They weren't drifting, they were maneuvering gently. No propulsion mechanism was detected. It was coordination through magnetism, chemistry, or perhaps something humanity had no language for yet. When the cluster crossed behind the moon, something unexpected occurred. A faint glow spread across its mass, a synchronized flash that rippled through every spore. Instruments detected a spike, an encoded pattern perfectly matching the earlier oscillations from Atlas's chambers. It appeared as if the cluster remembered, or was re-triggering dormant programming, or was reporting back to whatever network originally launched it into interstellar space. The possibility that Atlas had not been alone horrified some scientists. What if other carriers drifted through the galaxy? What if the spores were meant to awaken only within certain environments, like a cosmic colonization system operating on scales older than human evolution? Had Atlas originated from a species, a civilization, or a biological ecosystem that transcended individuals entirely? When the cluster emerged from behind the moon, it was different. It had condensed. The once diffuse particles gathered into a tighter swarm, moving with newfound cohesion. Webb's follow-up scan revealed that multiple spores were linking together with microscopic threads, forming delicate chains like the earliest stages of biofilm creation. Except these chains weren't random. They formed repeating symbols, fractal spirals, and helixes that pulsed in rhythm. Earth received another faint signal shortly after. It was stronger than the earlier pulses, longer, more structured. Analysts spent hours decoding it and uncovered ratios consistent with chemical blueprints, sequences describing potential metabolic cycles, cellular walls, environmental tolerances. It looked like a biological manual, as though the spores were broadcasting their nature to any potential receivers. Many interpreted this as the spores trying to communicate. Others feared it meant they were preparing. Preparing for what? No one could agree. Growth, landing, integration, the unknown loomed too large. As the cluster shifted closer to Earth's orbital path, the world held its breath. Scientists couldn't guarantee they could prevent atmospheric entry. The spores resisted every attempt to divert them. They didn't act hostile, but they acted purposeful. They moved with a motive humans couldn't decipher. The final moments of the day brought a new development. One spore broke from the cluster and accelerated toward Earth, far faster than any natural drift allowed. Cameras aboard multiple satellites tracked it, a tiny glowing mote streaking directly toward the atmosphere. Panic filled command rooms. Scientists prepared worst-case protocols. But before the spore reached the dense layers of air, it halted, hung motionless, pulsed once, then turned away, rejoining the cluster. It had tested Earth, or greeted it, or measured it, and the cluster responded with a unified flash, one bright enough for telescopes worldwide to catch. A flash that repeated a sequence from the original Atlas signal. A sequence that, once decoded, revealed something chillingly simple. We are awake.